Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Hope you're doing well. We are continuing our reading of Niccolo Machiavelli's The Prince and Other Writings. It has been very insightful, and I've enjoyed digging into this text. And let us begin, okay? We are in chapter 18, How Princes Must Keep Their Word. Bismillah. How laudable it is for a prince to keep his word and to live with integrity, and not by means of cunning. Everyone knows, nevertheless, one sees from experience in our times, that those princes have done great things who have had little regard for keeping their word, and who have been able to confuse men's brains by cunning, and in the end, they have overcome those who made loyalty their foundation. Now, this is interesting right here. Okay, so, laudable, so basically laughable, a touch of humor. Okay, so means of cunning. So, cunning, because cunning is close to cleverness. War is deception, as the Prophet, peace be upon him, said. Okay, so, keeping their word. Now, we are told to hold to our oaths. Holding to our oaths. Okay? And then confuse men's brains via your cunningness. So, confusion. And then loyalty. You must know, then, that there are two methods of fighting, one with laws, the other with force. Okay, so two methods of fighting. I think force is very potent, and laws are another way for the common person to really get a foothold on people who they detest. I've often told my daughter, you can fight because she's in martial arts, but sometimes legality is more cumbersome and stressful on a person, and you can slowly drain them of their energy with litigation. If you look at how the libs are pushing Trump and draining his resources with litigation and court stuff, that's an example. And then another example is Alex Jones. So his lawsuits for the Sandy Hook stuff, that's a tactic of making it so he can't really float and he has to sell a lot of his assets. So that would be an example. Right? The first one is proper to man. So proper is via laws. The second to beasts. But because the first one often does not suffice, one has to recourse to the second. So it's not sufficient enough to just use the laws, because that means you have to kind of respect the law, but force will work regardless of if someone respects it or not, right? Therefore, it is necessary for a prince to know well how to use the beast and the man. I would agree with that. You have to know how to do both, essentially. This procedure was taught to princes allegorically by ancient writers, who relate how Achilles and many other ancient princes were given to Chiron the centaur to be reared so that he might train them in his discipline. This is a great story, like Hercules and Phil, you know, that Disney cartoon. The centaur is interesting because of its allegory. Okay, so the centaur is half man, half beast. So split between the two worlds. Someone who is earthly but also has the consciousness of man. Having for a teacher one who was half beast and half man means nothing other than that a prince must know how to use both natures. So let's write over here, both natures. And that the one without the other cannot endure. That's a great point. So if you're just beastly, no one will deal with you. If you're just above it all, you're liable to get kneecapped by those who are quite ruthless. And this is shown in cinema constantly. we could give you endless examples, but to not belay the point, just think about in cinema how many times that has been proven right, and that the one without the other cannot endure, since a prince must know well how to use the nature of the beast. He must choose the fox and the lion from among them, for the lion cannot defend himself from traps, and the fox cannot defend himself from wolves. It is therefore necessary to be a fox to recognize traps, and a lion to frighten the wolves. Now that's an interesting phrase right there, because the fox has to be super clever in order to get into the chicken coop, right? And they're nice and warm so that they can endure the frost, waiting for when it's the right time. And the lion, when it's surrounded by the hyenas, well, they have to have some level of fear. But there are very cunning and brave hyenas who swarm and then take them down. What's that famous quote? 12 mangy dogs can kill a lion. Something like that. Those who live simply by the lion do not understand this. Therefore, a prudent ruler must not keep his word when keeping it would work against him. So here's the caveat. If you keep your word and it works against you, well, you need to revise. And when the reason which made him promise it have been removed. Okay, so if the reason for your initially promising it has been removed, then you need to switch lanes. And if men were all good, this precept would not be good. But since they are sadly wicked, and would not keep their word to you, you also do not have to keep it to them. Nor does a prince ever lack reasons to color over his failures to keep it. Of this one could furnish countless modern examples, to show how many peace treaties, how many promises have been rendered null and void by the disloyalty of princes, and how the one who has known best how to use the fox has turned out best. So the fox, this symbology of it, that's a clever way of putting it. But it is necessary to be able to use color over this character well, and to be a great hypocrite and dissembler. And men are so simple and so obedient to present necessities, that he who deceives will always find someone who will let himself be deceived. Oh my goodness. War's deception. And then the art of Sun Tzu, that one's also clever, because it just talks about, what is his famous line? Appear strong when you're weak, and when you're weak, appear strong. And then it's like the inverse as well. So if you are weak, appear strong, but if you're strong, appear weak. Both will have your advantage. One is a bluff, the other is kind of laying a trap. I do not want to remain silent about one of these recent examples. Alexander VI never did anything, never thought of anything other than deceiving men, and he always found material so that he could do it. And there was never a man who was more effective in swearing oaths and in affirming a thing with greater promises, who kept his word less. Nevertheless, his deceptions always succeeded for him according to his wishes, since he really knew this aspect of the world. But once you become known to be mistrustworthy, I think that would wear off then. Once your reputation precedes you, well, you're gonna be in trouble. Therefore, it is not necessary for a prince to have all the qualities mentioned above, but it is necessary to seem to have them. Indeed, I will be even so bold as to say this, that having them and always practicing them are dangerous, but appearing to have them is useful. For instance, to appear to be merciful, loyal, humane, forthright and religious, but to have your mind disposed so that, when it is necessary not to be that way, you'll be ready and able to change to the opposite. So I see, it's like a survival tactic. So he wants you to be merciful and, loyal and humane and forthright with your assertions and have some piety about you. But you need to know when to think in a dark manner. I understand that quite fully. Never underestimate the wickedness of people, and very little will shock you. A security mindset. And this must be understood, that a prince, and especially a new prince, cannot practice all those things because of which men are considered good, since he is often obliged, in order to maintain the state, to act against loyalty, against charity, against humanity, against religion. And therefore it is necessary for him to have a mind disposed to turn itself about as the winds and variation of fortune dictate. So to have a mind disposed to turn itself about as the winds and variations of fortune dictate. So I used to use that as an insult. You change your mind as the wind blows. It's more chaotic, unpredictable, less stable, and less reliable. You really can't rely on someone like that. They're always changing. And as I said above, he should not deviate from what is good if possible, but he should know how to enter into evil when necessity commands. So try to be good, but if you have to go dark mode, well, you gotta go dark mode. I think that's a very useful tactic for a leader, because if you're too soft, this can work against you. Definitely. A prince must therefore take great care that nothing slips from his lips which is not full of the 5 qualities mentioned above, and when one sees or hears him, he should seem to be all mercy. So, all mercy, all loyalty, all sincerity, all humanity, all religion. So, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Those are the 5 things. And nothing is more necessary to seem to have than this last quality. So, religion. He's saying you have to have the quality of religion. That's interesting. And men in general judge more by the eyes than by the hands. For everyone can see, but few can feel. Ooh. Dang. Everyone... Okay, the eyes. Perception. Appearances, right? Appearances. Everyone sees what you appear to be. Few feel what you are. And those few do not dare to oppose themselves to the opinion of the many, who have the majesty of the state to defend them. And in the action of all men, and especially of princes, where there is no court of appeal, one looks at the outcome. A prince should therefore conquer and maintain his state. His means will always be judged honorable and praised by everyone, for ordinary people will always be taken by appearances. So ordinary people will always be taken by appearances and by the outcome of an action. So, outcome of an action. And in the world there is nothing but an ordinary people, nor is there any place for the few when the many have something to lean on for support. A certain prince of the present time, whom it is not good to name, never preaches anything but peace and loyalty, and is the greatest enemy of both. And both of those things, had he practiced them, would on many occasions have deprived him of either his reputation or his state. Ooh, spicy. Okay, so, that he who deceives will always find someone who will let himself be deceived. So he doesn't want you to really be naive. So let's write naivete. Naivete. And so you need to have the qualities of mercy. You need appearances of mercifulness, the appearance of loyalty, sincerity, humanity, and religion. So with the religion angle, like you want to be good, but you have to know that like the capacity of wickedness, what your opponent is capable of. Don't underestimate is essentially what I'm getting from him. And the illusions of war. Now there's some interesting notes here that I always prove educational, and I want to read it to you. Machiavelli speaks here of keeping one's fede, or faith, which I have translated as keeping one's word, the more idiomatic English equivalent of this Italian expression. Okay, and then centaurs were mythical beasts who had the upper portion of a man and a lower of a horse. Chiron is said to have not just taught Achilles, but Asclepius and Jason. Although Chiron is mentioned in the Iliad, and centaurs are discussed in Xenophon's Chiropedia, which was clearly one of Machiavelli's favorite books, it's not clear to which ancient writers he's referring who supposedly allegorized Chiron in the way he explains in his texts. Machiavelli has derived these two allegorical beasts, as well as the notion that the prince must know how to fight like a man using laws and like beasts using force. So man uses laws, the beast uses force. Okay, and then from Cicero's On Duties 1:1134 and 1:1341, needless to say, Machiavelli's perspective on using the beast is not Cicero's. One looks at the outcome, si guarda al fine. Machiavelli's statement here concerns the way human psychology works, and offers an ironic and satirical perspective on people who are less concerned about the morality of the prince's method than about the outcome of his actions, since the latter may either benefit or harm them. Machiavelli's statement here is not the equivalent of his saying the end justifies the means, nor could such a statement be derived from what he says elsewhere in The Prince. Machiavelli is alluding to Ferdinand II of Aragon, also called Ferdinand the Catholic. Okay, so when he took a little stab saying, I won't name so-and-so, but it was Ferdinand II. So, who appears really religious, but lives a life contrary to that. That's funny. Machiavelli's throwing shade. He's throwing that shade around. Okay, chapter 19, on avoiding contempt and hatred. Because remember, in the previous section, he said it's better to be feared, but feared without hatred. Because if the question of is it better to be feared or loved, you can't control someone's love, but you can influence more their fear. But since with regard to the qualities which were mentioned above, I have now spoken of the most important, I want to discuss the others briefly in relation to this generalization. The prince, as was partly noted above, must think about avoiding those things which would make him hated and despised. And whenever he has avoided this, he will have done his part and will not be endangered whatsoever by other vices. So, don't be despised. Don't be hated. He will become hated above all, as I said, by being rapacious and usurping the property and women of his subjects, from which he must refrain. So the women, mistreating the women, turning them all into harlots, or taking somebody's wife and, humiliating her honor and the husband. So rapacious, this is very unrestrained appetites, a ferocious nature. It's like a more than a rambunctious type of malcontent. So rapacious, usurping the property. And then women, from which he must refrain, and whenever the majority of men are not deprived of their property or honor, they live contently. So don't deprive people. Don't deprive people of property or honor. They live contentedly. So the goal here is, if you don't want to be hated, the subjects need to be content. And only one has to combat the ambition of a few, which can easily be held in check in many ways. So the goal is to make your subjects content. Now, when I think about property, I think about how in America now, few people can afford a home. People are tired of being crammed in apartments like sardines, and they can't afford groceries as much, so you have to wonder. And then property taxes and all the other things that the government does to make it hard for you to actually own property. Okay, and then combating a few ambitious ones, holding them in check. He is rendered contemptible by being thought changeable, frivolous, effeminate, cowardly, irresolute, against which a prince must guard himself against a reef. And he must do his best, so that his actions one recognizes greatness, courage, dignity, and strength, and concerning the private affairs of his subjects, he should want his sentence to be irrevocable, and should remain such a reputation that no one would think to deceive him or try to get around him. Okay, so notice here, effeminate. So that'll make some really angry in the Rainbow Mafia, but a prince should not be effeminate. A prince should be masculine, not effeminate. And then changeable, so not changing on a dime. Frivolous, cowardly, irresolute. So the opposite of irresolute is resolute. So a prince must be resolute, because that shows firmness. Okay? So if you're effeminate and frivolous, that's a bad combo. So when you have a reef, you may not understand that example, but your boat, if it goes into a hard coral reef, you're gonna sink. So when you're guiding your boat, you watch the coast, you watch where you are, so that you don't ruin your boat. And if you have an expensive speedboat, or a yacht, you gotta watch out, Well, you don't want no Titanic situation. So courage, dignity, and strength concerning the private affairs of his subjects. Okay? You don't want people to try to get around you or try to deceive you. See, he told in the last section, you should be the deceiver. Leave them not knowing what's underneath, but you need to be smart enough to not be deceived. The prince who creates this opinion about himself will enjoy great prestige. So creating the opinion. Perception again. And it is difficult to conspire against, and difficult to attack someone who has such a reputation, provided that he is considered to be exceptional and revered by his people. Be exceptional. Be exceptional. Be revered. Now you can be revered while also being feared. For a prince must have two fears. Okay, let's see. One internal on account of his subjects, the other external on account of foreign powers. Okay, so two fears. Gotta write these down. Two fears. Internal equals the subjects, the people, subjects, and then external, foreign powers. External equals foreign powers. So your mind as a leader being occupied to deception and everything else. From the latter, he can defend himself with good arms and good friends. And he will always have good friends if he has good arms. And internal affairs will always remain stable when external ones are stable, unless they have already been disturbed by a conspiracy. But even if external conditions should change, if he has ruled and lived, as I have said, and does not lose control, he will always be able to withstand every assault, just as I have said Nabis the Spartan did. Okay, so Nabis the Spartan. But as for his subjects, when external conditions do not change, he has to fear that they may conspire in secret, from which the prince will be sufficiently secure if he avoids being hated or despised, and keeps the people satisfied with him. Okay, so you want to be sufficiently secure, and the way you do that, don't be hated, don't be despised, and the people being satisfied. Something which is necessary for him to do, as I said above at length, and one of the most potent remedies a prince has for conspiracies is not to be hated by the masses. Ooh. Okay, you want to prevent a conspiracy, don't be hated by the masses. So this makes me think about how the liberals are becoming more and more vehemently despised in a multitude of ways, and that's why they have to categorize everything as extreme. The sky is always falling with them. They must censor, and they must prevent communication on social media, so they cannot allow the free exchange of ideas, and they must call everything hate speech and call everything QAnon conspiracies or something, so that nothing can really be done, because the people are growing very discontent with them, and they're not able to unify the country. And Biden is despised, and that's why they took away the dislike button on YouTube. And YouTube will not allow people to talk about that. So Trump was also hated by the left. So we have Biden, who's despised because of his feeble, fickle nature, and then Trump is hated for his bombastic and blunt, uncouth demeanor. Others like him for that, but I'm just trying to explain the different sides. So, a leader who is feared but also revered, not despised and hated. Because if you notice the riots that happened a lot during Trump, you'd begin to see that clearly, you know, things are getting stagnant because there's just constant coverage of how much he's disliked, and then you see the opposite of he's always liked, and then the masses are just like beating each other. You know, it's really quite strange. For whoever conspires always believes that he will satisfy the people with the death of the prince. But if he believes he would offend them, he will not pluck up the courage to make such a move, because the difficulties on the side of the conspirators are infinite. So that's an example of that is how when the Brutus and them taking down Caesar, he was loved, not exactly hated. And so that caused a huge problem for them, and all those offenders joined him in the grave eventually. So what he's getting at here is, if you want to be loved, and you want to be feared and revered, But you don't want to be hated and despised, because when your death comes, the people will rejoice. But if you are actually cared for, the people who took you out are going to suffer, and they won't be seen as liberators. They won't be seen as the good guys. It sounds a lot like American foreign policy, thinking they can do regime change wars and then figuring out the people didn't actually want American rule. And experience shows that there have been very many conspiracies, but few have had successful outcomes. For whoever conspires cannot act alone, nor can he find companions except amongst those he believes to be discontented. So, that's fascinating. That's a good point. If you're a conspirator, you have to search out those who are discontent. They are not pleased. They are not satisfied. So a good ruler's got to make sure that some of the people he has around him are content. Not that, remember in the previous sections, you don't want to be too generous, but at the same time, you don't want to be hated. You have to have a sort of reputation about you. And as soon as you have uncovered your intention to a malcontent, you give him the means to make himself content. For by revealing your plot, he can hope to gain everything he wants. Thus seeing a certain gain on the one side, and a doubtful one full of danger on the other. So, gain on one side, and then full of danger on the other. Outcomes. If he keeps his word to you, he must either be a rare friend or an absolutely determined enemy of the prince. Okay, so if you're a conspirator, you're looking at, is this guy a rare friend? Or is he just truly an absolute enemy of the prince? So if you want to have a successful conspiracy, you have to find people who are really truly an enemy to that person, or they like you and they're down to ride. But that's a tough one, isn't it? And to reduce the matter to a few words, I say that on the part of the conspirator, there is nothing but fear, jealousy, and the prospect of punishment which terrifies him. But on the part of the prince, there is majesty of the principality, the laws and the protection of friends, and of the state which defend him. So that when the good will of the people is added to these things, it is impossible for anyone to be so rash as to engage in a conspiracy. For whereas ordinarily a conspirator must be afraid before executing his evil deed, in this case he must also fear afterward, since he will have the people as his enemy once his crime has been done. Nor can he hope for any sort of refuge. Aha! So refuge. After you've done the deed, and you gotta escape, and like, who's gonna house you? Think about how in The Walking Dead, when they first tried to take out the saviors, it wasn't successful. And then Negan, if he would have, like he knew, like Maggie was the wife of Glenn, who he bashed his brains in with a bat. And the leader of the Hilltop community wanted Maggie and Sasha gone because he knew it was dangerous to house them because they were conspirators against the saviors. And the saviors, you know, they put pictures up of their deeds, and they have rules, and they take arms, and they use irons on people's faces, and they use sleep deprivation torture and isolation torture, so and the strong fear tactics. So they were dangerous to house. So if you are a conspirator and you took out somebody and no one wants to give you refuge, you will suffer even though you finished your goal. You see what I'm saying? So That's what I think of when he mentions such a thing. Numberless examples might be given on this subject, but I will content myself with just one which took place within the memory of our fathers. Messer Annibale Bentivogli, Prince of Bologna, father of the present Messer Annibale, was killed by the Caneschi, who conspired against him, and he left no one to succeed but Messer Giovanni, who was in swaddling bands. Immediately after that murder, the people rose up and killed all the Caneschi. This came about because of the goodwill that the house of Bentivogli had at the time with the people, which was so great, that since there was no one left in Bologna after the death of Annibale who could govern the state, the Bolognese people, having information that a member of the Bentivogli family was in Florence, who had till then been considered the son of a blacksmith, came to fetch him in Florence and gave him control of the city, which was governed by him until Messer Giovanni reached the age to rule. Well, that's fascinating. Whoa, I never even heard of that guy. But that's pretty cool. See, Italy has such a vast history. I need to learn about my country. Even though I'm born in America and I'm ethnically Italian. Italian and Cherokee. I conclude, therefore, that a prince should not be greatly concerned about conspiracies when the people are well disposed toward him, but when they are his enemies and hate him, he must fear everything and everyone, and well-ordered states and wise princes have, with great diligence, taken care not to drive the nobility to desperation, and to satisfy the people and keep them contented. Okay, so I don't know what my husband is not, he must not know how to make the little teen tot happy right now. Sorry for her being a little fussy. They built the fort, and you never know, little kids, they fight over everything, but I'm sure she's fine. Okay, so notice here, taking care not to drive the nobility to desperation. So the nobles, fearing the nobles. And then satisfying the people. So the dance between the common person and your elites. If a country has a brain drain and all the elites leave, that's a lot of purchasing power gone. A lot of wealth can be gone. But people in of themselves, they can cause you great chaos by destroying your economy and revolting and rioting and whatnot. For this is one of the most important concerns that a prince has. So the balance, really. Among the kingdoms that are well ordered and well governed in our time is that of France, and in it are found countless good in situations on which depend the liberty and security of the king, of which the chief is the parliament and its authority. For the one who organized that kingdom, knowing the ambition of the nobles and their insolence, and judging it necessary to put a bit in their mouths. So a bit in their mouths is like what the horses have. And like when you pull the reins, it like makes the horse rear. So you have to put a bit in the mouths of the nobles so they're not so insolent. To hold them in check. Oh yeah, see, I was on the right track, mashallah. And on the other hand, knowing the hatred of the people for the great. A hatred based on fear and desiring to reassure them, did not want these things to be the particular concern of the king, in order to receive him of the dissatisfaction that he might incur among the nobles by favoring the people, and among the people by favoring the nobles. Aha, so the balance that I was right, yeah. So the classes, the class structures, class warfare. So if you're too schmoozy with the elites, the common man despises you sometimes, and for the elites, if you care too much for the common person, they start to feel threatened. And therefore he established a third judicial body that, without placing any burden on the king, might keep down the great and favor the lesser people. This arrangement could not be better or more prudent, nor is there a greater source of security for the king and kingdom. From this, another notable rule can be drawn, that princes ought to have others carry out unpopular tasks, and keep pleasing ones for themselves. Ooh, that is something that I've really noticed in business, where you can when they want to fire somebody, they'll send someone shorter on the ladder. Pardon me, 1 second. They'll send someone shorter on the ladder to do it, right? To do the dirty work, so that they can keep the nice guy appearance up. And so that way, like, you can see the little bit of him keeping the pleasing for himself leads to him being more liked, the bringer of good news. Unpopular tasks. That's interesting, having the middleman. Again, I conclude that a prince must respect his nobles, but not make himself hated by the people. So, okay. So, respect his nobles. They carry the wealth and the integrity of the nation. And then, not hated by the people. It could perhaps seem to many who have pondered the lives and deaths of a number of Roman emperors that they provide examples contrary to this opinion of mine, finding that some who always lived nobly and showed great strength, virtue of character, nevertheless lost their empire and were killed by their own people who conspired against them. Wishing, therefore, to respond to these objections, I will discuss the traits of a number of emperors, showing the causes of their ruin, which are not different from what I have deduced, and in addition, I will offer things worthy of note to be pondered on by anyone reading about the deeds done in those times, and I will content myself with taking all those emperors who succeeded to the imperial throne, from Marcus the philosopher to Maximinus. These were Marcus, his son Commodus, Pertinax, Julian, Severus, his son Antonius, Caracalla, Macrinus, Heliogabalus, Alexander, and Maximinius. So Caracalla, I wrote a paper on him. You should look up his bust. He looks like scary. I forgot. Was he the one who killed his mom? I forget. But Commodus, isn't he the one who had he commissioned him to have a Herculean lion headdress on, you know? Marcus Aurelius is one of my favorite Stoic philosophers. And the first thing to note is that whereas in other principalities, one only has to contend with the ambition of the great and the insolence of the people. So content, you have to work, the contentions with the ambitious people and the insolence of the people. But also, he said the insolence of the nobles on the last page. The Roman emperors had a third difficulty, that of having to endure the cruelty and avarice of the soldiers. What? Let's see. This was such a difficulty that it was the cause of the downfall of many of them. Oh, because remember when Caesar, where he gave a lot of rewards to the soldiers? I mean, they were a military-based empire, so naturally, if you don't please them, I mean, they're like literally what's keeping you in power. For it was difficult to satisfy the soldiers as well as the people, since the people loved peace and quiet, and because of this they loved princes who were moderate, while the soldiers preferred a prince who had a martial spirit. Aha! Okay, this is interesting. So the people loved peace and quiet, and they liked someone who was moderate, whereas the soldiers, well, they liked that more of a martial spirit. The god of war they had, Mars, right? And who was insolent, cruel, and rapacious, and they wanted him to practice these qualities on the people in order to get double pay and give vent to their avarice and cruelty. That's a question of the more soldiers you have and the more militaristic you become, the more cruel does your empire become? That's a question. The result of this was those emperors who did not have, by nature or by art. Aha! Notice this. By nature or by art. By art. So you have a finesse. By nature. They're just natural composition of their being. A great reputation such that they could use it to rein in both groups. Always came to grief. And most of them who came to power as new princes, knowing the difficulties created by these two different humors, the humors of the rapacious martial spirit and then the moderate, peaceful, and quiet spirit, turned to satisfying the soldiers and thought little about injuring the people. This choice was necessary, because princes who cannot avoid being hated by somebody must first strive to avoid being hated by the vast majority of people. And if they cannot accomplish this, they must try, with all their might, to escape the hatred of the classes that are the most powerful. So, to escape the hatred of the classes that are most powerful. Whew. If you're hated, wow. Are the people more powerful in the empire, or are the nobles? Don't piss them off, right? And therefore these emperors, who, as new princes, had need of extraordinary support, stuck to the soldiers more willingly than the people. Nevertheless, this turned out to be useful to them or not, depending on whether the prince knew how to maintain his reputation with the soldiers. Okay, so maintaining the reputation with the soldiers. So clearly, reputation is being emphasized here greatly. Two humors. He really has a great way with words that really gets you seeing his point. And he acknowledges those who differ with him, and we can see where he's coming from. And really examining history can help us see where he's coming from. And also looking to the situation in the present, I would argue, helps as well. America is a military-based empire. The soldiers are very hoorah. That's changing due to the wokeness. And with the proxy war with Russia and Ukraine, and then watching the Jays commit mass genocide in Gaza, the people's tiredness and weariness for war it's coming up, and their enthusiasm for bloodlust is waning. 20 years in Afghanistan, and people not seeing how that benefited them. All they're seeing is disabled veterans in the street, veterans with PTSD, and all the other problems. They're not really seeing the fruits, and getting the degeneracy in the White House under the Biden administration isn't helping. And so it's so important to look at this from a political science angle as well. Let me know what you think. It's a great topic. If you'd like to support my channel, I'm not monetized. And if you'd like to read more about what I write, you can do so by going to my blog, which is www.subscribestar.com/MilahanArchive. Hope to see you there.